Winds of Exchange just delivered the new highest ranked KeyForge deck in the world, Tufttse of the Dogcatcher's Asteroid at 119 SAS. With a 19 SAS Mars house, a 23 SAS Equidon, and a 74 SAS Brobnar house, I just had to give this deck a closer look. After seeing truly shocking stats such as a creature control score of 47, I wanted to analyze this deck a little deeper and bring you guys along with me. Without further ado, let's get into it. To begin with, Tufttse has the Berserker token, widely recognized as one of the best token creatures. It has an insane token generation score of 26, which contributes massively to the 74 SAS seen in the Brobnar house alone. Double Esquire, double Space Invaders, Endless Hordes, triple Press Gang, double Iron X Propaganda, double Stratosmack, Ornate Talking Tray, and Jarl's Vend. We'll get more into this later, but this deck truly does spam out tokens faster than any deck I've ever seen, and the ability to generate swarms of tokens that enter play ready no less can be quite powerful. Usually Berserkers die once you fight with them, but with Revenant Starsong on the board, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. The deck is also unique in that the Equidon pod has an Antiquities dealer, who brought along Potion of Invulnerability and Seeker Needle as Legacy Maverick artifacts. Then in the Mars, there's Aether Spider and Total Recall, both solid cards. So, I played 10 games with this deck in the competitive queue on TCO, and for being the highest SAS deck out there, you'd probably expect it to be virtually unbeatable, right? Well, this was not my experience at all. In fact, I came out with a losing record, 4 wins and 6 losses. I played to the best of my ability, and though I did have a couple mistakes here and there, the deck just rarely had the answers or moves I wanted or needed. And after 10 games with it, giving me plenty of practice to learn the deck better and better, the more I found lacking in certain critical areas. One of the first things I learned over the course of these games is that Tufttse has only one singular game plan: to make token creatures. The one thing this deck can do to a terrifyingly dominant degree is create Berserkers, and as a result, it can control the board extremely well. That 47C isn't there for no reason. Equidon doesn't do a whole lot of token gen, and the Mars can potentially generate with those Space Invaders, but the Brobnar just goes wild with them. Especially once those 3 press gangs start getting archived, you can be creating 3 or more of them every Brobnar turn, and it starts snowballing exponentially from there. During one of my games, I had 13 of them on board at once. Sadly, the rule of 6 prevented me from getting to use more than 6 of them in a single turn, but it was still quite the sight to behold. However, this relentless vomit of Berserkers led me to 2 realizations. First, Berserkers without Revenant Starsong on the board are pretty much just bouncing Deathquark in creature form. At 5 power, Berserker can kill most things, but that enemy creature could just have 1 power, and Berserker will still die. Each fight is a 1-for-1 trade, and that's only if the enemy creature actually dies. If it's larger than 5 power, it'll typically require more than 1 Berserker to kill it. So if I'm behind on board and generating Berserkers is the only way for me to catch up, it really does just feel like playing Bouncing Deathquark in a moment of panic, leaving me with a board that's still empty and the opponent still in an advantaged state. I didn't find myself in that position very often, but it didn't feel good when I did. Only Endless Hordes could really bail me out of those scenarios safely, because I sure as heck didn't want to play mass buyout and give my opponent a bunch of free Ember. Secondly, that sort of rampant tokenization leads to extremely high variance. It was incredibly frequent to see all sorts of critically important cards like Rant and Rive, Closed Door Negotiation, Total Recall, and Revenant Starsong get tokenized. And like I said before, this deck's one single game plan is to make token creatures. So if you're discarding token makers in an effort to lessen the risk of losing those aforementioned important key cards, you're really not advancing any sort of game plan whatsoever. And unfortunately, Tufttse just doesn't have enough Ember control to justify that sort of excessive token making. As a result, I found myself caught between a rock and a hard place far too many times. Either go wild with token generation since it's the only available game plan and risk losing out on important cards, or don't tokenize nearly as much and make very little forward progress. Obviously, 90% of what this deck does is board-based, meaning if the opponent had the ability to rapidly advance outside of the use of a board, Tufttse could struggle a bit. Tufttse can massively punish and prevent a board, and utilize its own board to great extent, but can do very little about out-of-hand effects and methods of racing that way. In that case, it really needs to focus on establishing its own board and racing with it, not worrying so much about what the opponent is doing and just rebout. At that point, it's just an all-out race to the finish. If the cards came to deal with the opponent's moves, then that was great, but more often than not, I found myself lacking answers to anything that wasn't a board presence or something relying on said board presence. But a lot of times, the deck executed its objective perfectly. Let me tell you, when Tufttse hums, Tufttse hums. The great thing about Berserker is that if it doesn't have anything to fight, it can still reap. Whether it's enraged or not, it can still reap, it just won't lose the enraged token. So that meant every time I was facing down an empty board and I called Brobnar, I could reap out for a ton of Ember turn after turn. Tufttse can clear out an opponent's board with ease, so it was quite often that my Berserkers were able to reap. Total Recall is an awesome card in this deck too. Being able to return 10 or more Berserkers to hand in addition to a few other regular creatures and gain an Ember for each of them creates some massive burst and is a play I was always on the lookout for. Ironix Rebel is quite a versatile card as well, with things like Xanthix Harvester and being able to get the Propagandist to fire off more consistently, and Mars Needs Ember is just a classic Ember control card. Things like that are a couple extra plays Tufttse has in addition to token spam, but again, that's only if they don't get tokenized. Overall, the deck is crazy. It's strong to be sure, but not quite what I would expect from a deck rated 119 SAS. It's one of the most bloated scores I've seen. The variance created by such excessive over-the-top tokenization is just too high. You lose your important, few and far between Ember control cards too frequently, and the deck does very little outside of its singular Berserker-focused game plan. If you're not in a Brobnar turn, you're probably not getting much done. The deck can high roll for sure, but even just a single Brick Nasty or Ragnarok prep to replace a couple of those press gangs would have made the deck that much stronger. A little less tokenization, maybe lose the Esquires and the Space Invaders, and it would be a far more consistent deck. Maybe throw in a few more Ember control cards, and something to reward you more for fighting than just the sake of an empty board and the ability to reap out. In my 10 games, I just found the deck lacking much depth. The goal was always to reach a state where I could reap out with my Berserkers, and if I wasn't able to reach that state, or the opponent was just faster than my ability to do so, then I would often lose. I hoped for better than a 4-6 record out of Tufttse, and while the games I got to play with it were fun and interesting to be sure, it just doesn't quite live up to that 119 SAS score in my opinion. For €1,000 it can be yours, and maybe you'll be able to find more success with it than I could. And there we have it. Let me know what you guys think of Tufttse of the Dogcatcher's Asteroid in the comments below, and if your experience with it has been any different than mine if you've had the opportunity to play with it. It was a very unique play experience, truly the epitome of token spam and Winds of Exchange. KeyForge Celebration 2 is just a couple days away, the event is taking place this weekend, and I'll be there. I'm very excited, and I hope to see some of you there too. My coverage for that event will be dropping on November 17th. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.